Sorry.
Good morning and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. This morning we are going to be engaging with Psalm 39. And like many of the Psalms that we have looked at this year, I felt in reading this Psalm that it spoke to the moment, I think maybe differently than I might have experienced it if we had studied it last summer. So we can talk about that, and I wonder if it's the same for you. Um, Psalm 39 has no connections to Jewish liturgy. There no references. I looked very carefully. Sometimes even when it's a psalm that's has very limited use in the Jewish tradition, in the liturgical canon, like there's a phrase or a verse that is quoted, and I really couldn't find that with this psalm. So because of that, it was unfamiliar to me. I mean, not unfamiliar, but less familiar. I I tend to be much more familiar with the Psalms that have resonances in Jewish prayer because that's my main opportunity for reciting Psalms. And while I have, read through the whole book of Psalms, and while I've done the spiritual practice of reciting Tehillim for a particular purpose, when you are reading through Tehillim in Hebrew, it isn't the same kind of intensive study that we're doing in this class. Like usual, I'll start by reading the psalm in Hebrew and then in a couple of our English translations, and I've provided the source sheet by email, and I'll also share my screen.
Together.
And the first pass through the psalm, we are engaged with the emotional impact of the psalm. What is the theme? What is the emotion being conveyed in the words? And why might you use this as a prayer? How might you use it if you were going to use this psalm for yourself? In what context in your own life would saying a prayer like this be useful? So with that, we'll jump right into Psalm 39. Lamenatseach lidutun mizmor leDavid. Amarti eshmera drachai mechato bilshoni, eshmera lefi machsom beod rasha lenegdi. Ne'elamti dumia hechesheti mitov uche'evi nekar. Cham libi bikirbi, bahagigi tivar eish dibarti bilshoni. Hodieni Adonai kitzi umidat yamai mahi, eidea mechadel ani. Hine tefachot natata yamai vecheldi cha'ayin negdecha, ach kol hevel kol adam nitzav sela. Ach betzela mitalech ish, ach hevel yehemayun, yitzbor, velo yeda mi osefam. Ve'ata ma kiviti Adonai, tochalti lechahi, mikol sha'ai hatzileni, herpat naval al tisimeni, ne'elamti lo eftach pi ki ata asita. Haser me'alai nig'echa, mitigrat yadcha ani chaliti, betochachot al avon yisarta ish, vatemes kaas chamudo, ach hevel kol adam, Selah. Shim'a tefilati Adonai v'shavati ha'azina, el dim'ati al techerash, ki ger anochi imach, toshav kechol avotai, asha mimeni ve'av liga, beterem elecha ve'eneni. For the leader, for Yedutun, a psalm of David. I resolved I would watch my step, lest I offend by my speech. I would keep my mouth muzzled while the villain was in my presence. I was dumb, silent. I was very still while my pain was intense. My mind was in a rage. My thoughts were all aflame. I spoke out. Tell me, O Eternal One, what my term is. What is the measure of my days? I would know how fleeting my life is. You have made my life just hand's breadths long. Its span is as nothing in your sight. No human endures any longer than a breath. Selah. Everyone walks about as a mere shadow. Mere futility is their hustle and bustle, amassing and not knowing who will gather in. What then can I count on, O my sovereign? In you my hope lies. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Make me not the butt of the benighted. I am dumb. I do not speak up, for it is your doing. Take away your plague from me. I perish from your blows. You chastise everyone in a punishment for sin, consuming like a moth what they treasure. No human is more than a breath. Selah. Hear my prayer, O Eternal One. Give ear to my cry. Do not disregard my tears, for like all my forebears, I am an alien resident with you. Look away from me that I may recover before I pass away and am gone. I'm going to read the translation that includes Rashi's commentary, the Rashi Ketuvim by Rabbi Shraga Silverstein. For the conductor, to be played upon the Yidutun, a psalm for David. I, Israel, said in my heart, I will abide in my accustomed ways, not to sin with my tongue by questioning the attribute of justice. I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, though the wicked are against me. I was mute with silence for many days. I stilled myself from good Torah study in fear of my foes, and my pain in doing this was grievous and sore. And in my silence, my heart was hot within me. A fire flamed in my thoughts, and compulsively I spoke with my tongue. Make known to me, O Lord, my end. How long will I suffer so? And what is the extent of my days for such suffering? Let me know when I will be quit of it. You have set limits to my days, and my hoariness is as naught before you. Verily, all is vanity. All men are thus in vanity forever founded. Verily, man walks in darkness. Verily, in vanity do they desire. He amasses grain in the field all the days of the harvest, and he does not know who will gather it in to the house. It may be that he will die beforehand. And now, this being so, what can I hope, O Lord? My hope to you is this: from all my offenses, save me. Do not make me the shame of the churl Esav. Bring suffering upon him, i.e., the nations, too, so that he cannot say, you are smitten, and we are not. This prayer availed to bring the affliction of illness upon the nations. I was mute. I did not open my mouth, for you wrought, i.e., you brought more afflictions upon us than upon the other nations. Remove your afflictions from me. From the assault, the blows of your hand I perish. With chastisements for sin that was written in the Torah, you have afflicted us, and you have rotted his flesh as a moth rots a garment. Verily, all man is vanity forever. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and listen to my cry. Do not be silent to my tears, for I am a stranger with you, a sojourner, as all of my fathers. Leave off from afflicting me, that I may recover, before I go and am no more. And I'll read also the contemporary English version, which is a Christian translation. A psalm by David for Yedutun, the music leader, a prayer for forgiveness. I told myself I'll be careful not to sin by what I say, and I'll muzzle my mouth when evil people are near. I kept completely silent, but it did no good, and I hurt even worse. I felt a fire burning inside, and the more I thought, the more it burned until at last I said, please, Lord, show me my future. Will I soon be gone? You made my life short, so brief that the time means nothing to you. Human life is but a breath, and it disappears like a shadow. Our struggles are senseless. We store up more and more without ever knowing who will get it all. What am I waiting for? I depend on you, Lord. Save me from my sins. Don't let fools sneer at me. You treated me like this, and I kept silent, not saying a word. Won't you stop punishing me? You have worn me down. You punish us severely because of our sins. Like a moth, you destroy what we treasure most. We are as frail as a breath. Listen, O Lord, listen, Lord, to my prayer. My eyes are flooded with tears as I pray to you. I am merely a stranger visiting in your home as my ancestors did. Stop being angry with me and let me smile again before I am dead and gone. So what emotions jump out at you in this psalm? Murray, you have to unmute.
Marcia told me they're having trouble with their mute button, so they may not be able to.
Got it, got it,
There
got
he
it.
is. Okay.
The impression here is a low emotional state, a little depression, a little loneliness, isolation, and a little bit being lost and looking for some help from the divine in getting out of it. Apparently, no other humans around are a source of help. And so the person here is just saying, this is my last hope. Help me to get out of this.
All right. Murray says it's a poem from a very low place, a place of depression, a place of isolation. What else did people feel? Yeah, Larry.
You could, I agree with that, obviously, but you could also look at it quite differently. There's something very strange in here. In most of the translations, particularly the more modern English, like the Revised English Bible, is I spoke with my tongue. He's made a decision to keep quiet. He's in the presence of evil. Evil's happening to him. He's just going to sit and endure it. He said, "No," and I think I must witness to this person who you are and who I am, what we both are. And you can read this as an admonition to the wicked to think about how stupid you're being, rather than just the more straightforward translation. And the Selah, the emphasis happens twice in here, and each time it's reminding that every mortal being is only a breath of wind. It's a reminder that we're in this together. What you're seeing happening here to me is same for you. So think, brother, wake up. So I see it as a witness, an admonition to the nations and to the wicked.
Great. So the Selah, that word, which we've discussed before in our study of Psalms, it doesn't have any meaning, but what it does is it adds emphasis. Some people believe that it was assigned to the conductor for a musical interlude. Some people believe that it was a more direct, like musical direction. Some people just think that it's a pause. Some people think that sort of similar to Amen, it is a word which agrees with what just came before it. But however you understand it, the word Selah adds emphasis. And there are two Selahs in this poem, and both follow the sentence, all human beings are vapor. All human beings are vanity. Everything is Hevel, right? And that's very similar to the language of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's language of Havel Havalim, right? Everything is a shallow breath. Everything is a shallow breath. And yes, it is a poem from a low place, but if you focus on the fact that everyone, the righteous and the wicked, every human being is a shallow breath away from death. Every human being breathes in and breathes out, and we all breathe in and out the same air, the same vapor. And your actions matter, but your actions don't change your ultimate fate, which is that we're all going to die. And in fact, the fact that we're all going to die, perhaps that clarifies how important your actions are and how important it is to choose righteousness. And so at the beginning of this psalm, he says, I'm just going to grin and bear it. I'm just going to take the abuse. I'm just going to sit here, right? Or another possible way to understand it is, when I'm among people who are wicked, I will not be drawn into their wicked speech. I will not be drawn into their slander. I will sit here, but I will not participate in that wicked speech. Right? That's another possible way to understand it. But whether he's taking the abuse from the wicked or whether he doesn't want to participate in wickedness, either way, he is overwhelmed. His heart grows hot within him and it burns with fire, and he can't help but speak. He can't help but speak. And indeed, right, the psalm itself is that speech. Almost the right. He gives us a little bit of narrative at the beginning, but the rest of the psalm is what he wanted to say in that moment when he was overwhelmed by the wicked around him, and he told himself, I'm not going to say anything, I'm not going to say anything, but then it burst forth, and the whole psalm is that. And if there is this emphasis on the shallow breath, it is almost, as Larry suggests, it is almost a way of connecting to the wicked people, a way of saying, we're the same, we're both human. Great. Other thoughts about the emotional content of this psalm?
I just
Barbara.
was struck by I was just struck by the difficulty that I have when I'm in a situation where there is turmoil around me. It's so difficult to hold my tongue, and his struggle is so apparent, and that's how I feel, and sometimes it bursts out, and I say things that I wish I hadn't said. Um, and I think later about the things that I wish I had. So I don't know. This one is very personal to me.
Yeah. So I love both of those thoughts, right? In some sense, the what he's describing, what the poet is describing, that sense that you can't help but say something, that it bursts out of you.
Yes.
That is an experience that many of us have had. And on the other hand, who knows what he said in the moment? He says he said this in the moment, but this is a poem. It is it's a literary work. It's a creative expression. He wants us to think that this is what he said in the moment, but maybe it's more the other half of what, Barbara, you just said, that maybe it's that afterward he was like, oh, this is what I should have said. And so he wrote this psalm that puts himself back into that moment, and gives expression to that feeling where he felt like, oh, maybe I didn't say it quite right, but now I have a chance to really say what I wanted to say to God, which is tell me how long I have to live, God. Tell me how long I'm going to suffer. I feel like I could just get through the next day if I knew that the suffering was going to end 3 days from now, you know? Right? That's what I feel from this psalm, right? Let me know, O Lord, my end, and what is the measure of my days? How much longer do I have to deal with this? It would be easier if I knew the end date. If I knew the end. Other thoughts? Gary.
Yeah. I guess my reaction was that it was more personal, that this was someone suffering sick or injured or something like that and just can't take it anymore. And I'm also really struck by the last line, which seems to say that he can't face God's judgment. Just ask God to look away and let him pass.
Yeah, it's a very powerful last line. This last line is I don't know for sure. This is just my hunch. But I think the last line is the reason why this psalm isn't in Jewish liturgy. I think the idea that we would ask God not to look at us runs very counter to our general prayers in the Jewish tradition, which ask God to show favor by shining God's countenance on us. That is right. When we think about metaphors for feeling God's presence, we describe that as experiencing God's face or experiencing God's gaze. And to ask for to be not looked at, I think goes counter to that more general trend. But I also think that that last line is part of the spiritual wisdom of this psalm. When I was a hospice chaplain and I was visiting folks as they were dying, I heard story after story of situations where, family were there 24/7 with the dying person, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days past when the nurses said that it was likely that the person would go. And then finally, their daughter or whoever is with them, goes home to take a shower. And while they're gone, the person leaves, dies. And when I read line 14, that was my immediate association. I was like, oh, peer not at me before I go away and am no more, right? This person just wants to be left alone so he can die. And there's something that's holding him here. And so that's where and I think there's a real spiritual insight in that like sometimes we need to have space to not be looked at. And then, the second to last verse, which describes a very complicated relationship with God, right? I am a stranger in your house, God, just like my parents were, and just like my grandparents were. It's got both closeness and distance in that, right? Like, I am a sojourner in your house, a stranger in your house, like my parents before me. Whew. I was also really struck by the end of this song. And there's no hope, right? I mean, it doesn't end with hope the way that some songs do. And not that the ending isn't beautiful, but I think the ending is heartbreaking in some sense. It does not bring us out of this pit of despair. It says, I mean, I guess it is in the sense that it describes your relationship with God. But the relationship with God is a very fraught one. It isn't a close relationship. It's a relationship of strangers. And so that's a challenge. There's a real challenge there. I think that reflects something real in spiritual life. Larry.
At the same time, he's with God, and he recognizes this is God's house that he's in,
That's
and
right.
that he doesn't understand it. And there's so much that's unknown to me, both what this is about, how to negotiate. It's God's home, not mine. but he's invited me in. I'm here. And so I'm acknowledging I am not a master of this. What can I do?
Yeah.
But in one translation it says, I find shelter with you. Do not be deaf to my weeping, for I find shelter with you. That's the Revised English. Hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry. Don't be deaf to my weeping, for I find shelter with you. I am a passing guest, as all my forefathers were. Frown on me no more. Not don't look at me anymore. It's don't frown on me. Let your gaze be not one of rejection or anger. So frown on me no more. Let me look cheerful before I depart and cease to be. That's the
Yeah.
Oxford Cambridge Revised English Bible.
Yeah.
It just really captures that sense of it's not all hopeless. It's you're acknowledging to God your visitorship, and it's His. But boy, guide me, help me, comfort me through this thing. Don't just whap on me. And which leads me back to this is almost something you want to say or convince the evildoer in the world of what's going on, which is why I look at it as sort of a witness to the world, not just woe is me. It's look, we're all in this together. This isn't your home, it's God's. I acknowledge that I'm a guest. So are you, buddy.
Yeah. Barbara, if you're muted.
There we go. I'm just struck by the stark honesty of this. You know, I would like to pray like this. I don't, where I'm really looking at where I'm at and, what I'm doing and not that, and where I would rather be, and to really speak it out.
The psalmist definitely gives us a model for how to be honest and direct in our speech to God and in our speech to other people. What we really want to say, we should say it. Linda, I saw your hand before.
I've been going back to a talk that I heard. I think Eli Wiesel was there. I'm not sure, but he was talking about that we're all in a rowboat and together, and that we have to acknowledge that fact. And if we're going to try to keep the water from coming in, then we all have to work together. I mean, there's no out about this. We're all in this rowboat. And I don't know if that applies to all of this. It seems like it might.
Yeah, there's a very famous parable that I think you're referring to, where it's a parable about collective responsibility and collective punishment. Parable about our individual actions and how they affect the collective. The parable is exactly as you said, right? Why should you recycle? Why should you care about the environment? Why should you contribute money to the community's tzedakah fund? Why should you help pay for the synagogue's maintenance and the lights to be on? And the answer is, well, we're all on this boat. And just like a person can't drill a hole under their chair and
Right.
say, oh, but it's just my chair,
Right.
right? Because that person has to understand that even though we have a semblance of private property, even though we have a semblance of individual separate lives. Ultimately, we're all on this boat, and if one person drills a hole underneath their personal chair, that affects everybody. And we're all going down with that sinking ship. And so the parable says, right, obviously we all have our own chair in life, right? We have individual choice. We have free will, right? We do interact with the world as individuals. But if we only interact with the world as individuals, then that is to our detriment and to the world's detriment. And we might bring down other people with us. There's definitely in this, as Larry said, witness to the evildoers, there's definitely resonances of that kind of an argument in this poem, in this parable, right? We are all in this together. We're all in this together. My life is a shallow breath. Your life and my life, in comparison to the eternity of the divine, are both fleeting, instantaneous, right? When you compare us to eternity, there is no comparison. We are finite and God is infinite. And when you compare our finite existence to the infinite, we're like nothing. And in that sense, whether you're good or you're evil, you're still small. But then we have a choice of how to live. And we should choose to live without, drilling holes under our own metaphorical seats.
Exactly.
As much as possible.
Yeah.
Larry, you're muted.
One other thought about that Sela instruction. It's not something you say, it's an instruction. It's in parenthesis. I don't know how it looks in the original, but it's always clearly shown as either italics or in parentheses. Psalms are, since they're intended to be sung with music, makes you think that what he's saying is this is like a coda, where instead of just reading on, let's sing this 4 or 5 or 10 times, let's make a whole tune about this, and let's not just stress it, but show, just magnify and glorify it, that this is the essence of what this is all about. So if it were a musical instruction, it would be like that. It would be like a coda.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's, however it's understood, it's clear that it adds emphasis. And I do think that thinking about it as a musical coda is useful. So I often share with you the spiritual applications. And I did put a section of it, but I wanted to read you the whole thing that he wrote. Rabbi Richard Levy. It's called Songs Ascending, the book of Psalms, a new translation with textual and spiritual commentary. And I find it very useful because of his spiritual commentary, which I don't always pick up on the same things that he picks up on, which is nice. So he says, how often do we bemoan the brevity of life? Often it is others' deaths that make us aware of this. Right? Like when we go to a funeral and we listen to a eulogy and we think, oh my gosh, when I die, what will they be able to say about me? How often do we bemoan the brevity of life? Often it is others' deaths that makes us aware of this. But as we age and ill health threatens us, we think of all that we would still like to do, all the lives we still wish to touch. And we are struck by this psalm's comparison of our lives to that of the moth. drawn to the fire that will consume it, even as we are drawn to possessions or people, even to love that can consume us as well. Kohelet, whose teachings are similar, that's Ecclesiastes. Kohelet, whose teachings are similar to many in this psalm, tells us that there is a time to be born and a time to die, suggesting that God sets those times. And as our lives seem to draw to a close, we become like Moses, arguing with God in the Midrash, pained that the being in whom we have sought comfort so often in our life, whose teachings we felt have guided us so often, is also the being who has made the duration of our life part of God's plan. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, we say when we hear of a death. Praised be the true judge, the one whose judgment of the span of our life is part of the nature of truth itself. Like the poet, we also are of two minds. Listen to me. Give ear to me. Right? Hear my prayer. To my cry hearken. But look away sometimes, so I can be spontaneous, so I can enjoy the fullness of life without always having to strive to be moral. If we stray too far, we pray that God will set us straight again. Deliver me from all my rebellious acts. Above all, aware of how ephemeral is our existence, aware of the blows that life inflicts on us, we want to show our smile, to delight in the beauty of the brief life we have been granted, to walk about not as a pale image of God, but fully living out the image of God in which we were created. We have been silent too long. It is time to speak. God, let me know what your plan is for my life. Murray.
Well, I think it's a wonderful, actually, how shall I say, educational expansion of the meaning of the psalm. And to me, it seems taking all of the commentary and all the descriptions as showing that David now is at the end of his days. He has reflected on his youth and his vigor at the pinnacle of his power, but now he's down all that. And all his strength is waning. And here he is now, says, I'm just another human being. And what can I do at the end of my days but speak out and tell the people all the wisdom that I have learned, and that there is still, that we should not necessarily waste our lives, but continue to speak out and preach and teach and be exemplary. And that is what he's saying. God, give me at least that much more before I go.
Amen. Well said.
So we're looking at this psalm on the 10th of September, which we've just begun the month of Elul, the last month of the Jewish calendar year, the month in which we lead up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I feel like this psalm is a perfect psalm for the season of repentance. You know, we studied Psalm 27 a little while back, which is the psalm that we recite every morning and every evening during this period. But there's something very powerful about Psalm 39 as it relates to the same topic, the topic of examining our lives, of doing cheshbon nefesh, of reflecting on the meaning and value of our existence, how we relate to our choices. And I just really loved the way that Rabbi Levi described that what we're really looking for is to experience the joy of the ephemeral, to delight in the beauty of the brief life we have been granted. That's like the whole message of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, right? On Rosh Hashanah, we crown God king so that God can sit in judgment. On Yom Kippur, God sits in judgment and hopefully judges us for life. And on Sukkot, we have joy. That is the holiday, the festival of Simcha, the festival of understanding that life is precious and that the stuff that we have is just stuff. That's why we go outside into a sukkah, not your regular house, but your temporary house, where we recognize the power of joy, right? The joy of understanding that we delight in our ephemeral existence. And like in some sense, it's very surprising to me that we don't have this psalm in our liturgy at all, when the theme of it is so connected to this season. You'd think it would have made it into, and so many of the psalms that we've looked at have been in the Salichot prayers or the Rosh Hashanah, right? The penitential prayers for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but this psalm, no reference. I did give you my take on why I think that is, though it's just a hunch. I have no scholarly work that backs that up.
I think it's because it's Christian.
Right. So there is something to that, right, Larry? It is there is something to, right? The Jewish tradition tends to pass over psalms that are deeply resonant in a Christian theological context. But I don't know that this one, I mean, certainly there's a way to read it that's very Christological, but I think, it's also possible to read it not that way. Gary.
Well, I mean, I was trying to make it more specific, but I must say, when I read this, it reminded me in its spirit of just thinking about Yom Kippur coming up again, of Unetana Tokef, of especially when it speaks about life is but a few hands breadths and we walk about in a shadow, and so on. So it reminded me of that prayer that we say on Yom Kippur, except that the last line is completely different, and it goes to the point that you were making, because the Unetana Tokef says at the very end, prayer and repentance is the answer, and this one says, "Look away from me."
Yeah, right. I do think that that is my hunch, is that phrase is why this psalm is not used in Jewish tradition, and it's it does sort of fit with my ongoing thesis question about these psalms, which is, when the rabbis quote a verse, do they intend you to know the whole psalm? Are they importing also the emotional resonance of the entire origin psalm when they quote a verse or a phrase? And I am convinced that is true, at least in some cases, but probably more than just some. And part of why I think not even a single phrase of this psalm is used is because of exactly that. Because they're worried that if you import a phrase of this psalm, you'll also import the part that says, "Look away from me," which doesn't fit with a classical rabbinic theology. So I mean, it's hard to prove from a negative, but it feels to me like it feels to me like that's a piece that this goes along with my general my general thinking on this issue. Maybe someday I'll write something about it, but the truth is it's not so scholarly. It's just a hunch. I don't know how I would prove that. I don't know how anybody would prove that. Yeah. So one last thing, and then I'm gonna read you an interpretation of this psalm from Gaia Aronoff Bernstein's Psalm Songs, which I've done a couple times in the past. The one last thing that I wanted to bring up is, what do you think the relationship between this psalm and Psalm 38 is? So one of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago when we looked at Psalm 38 is that, we talked about the first person narrative, the way in which Psalm 38 really doesn't use we at all. Unlike some of the first person psalms where first person singular psalms, where in the middle it switches to a first person plural, right? And so Psalm 38 was like that, and we spent a while talking about that 2 weeks ago. And Psalm 39 is like that too. And so these psalms, I think, are they're of a piece. They're connected to each other. They're both deal with illness. They both seem to be set in old age. We did talk about how the language of old age in Psalm 38 doesn't necessarily have to be old age, but and it could be a metaphor for grief, or for regret, or for guilt. So we did talk about that 2 weeks ago. But the contextual language, what it says, it does definitely, there's definitely a lot of connection to the old age, and also this psalm has that. And so, Murray, you said here's David at the end of his life, and I think Psalms 38 and 39 both have this. They're kind of a unified response to that. They're together for a reason, I think. And they have slightly different answers. So, and both play with, I forgot to mention, they both play with the idea of being unable to speak and unable to hear, right? So in Psalm 38, the poet says, I am like a deaf person, I do not hear, and like one who is mute, whose mouth moves not, right? Let me not respond to chastisements. Let me not, right? And then in Psalm 39, he starts by saying, I sat there and I was convinced I wasn't going to respond, and I was sure I was going to hold my tongue, and then I couldn't. But where Psalm 38 says, do not abandon me, God. Do not be far away from me. Be my help. Psalm 39 ends with, actually look away from me.
Yeah.
Actually look away from me. Hear my prayer, but look away from me. And so Psalm 38 and 39, I think, are balancing these two impulses in some way. Linda.
I just said Zekosha. It's hard.
Yeah. You want to say more about that?
What?
Say more. What's hard?
Well, to tell God to look away from you, to catch your breath before you depart, and I'm not, that's awful. Lafidati.
Yeah. sometimes the gaze of the divine can feel really suffocating. And the psalmist clearly feels some of that. And so she says, look away from me so that I can catch my breath. Are there times in our lives where the gaze of the divine or the gaze of other people around us has felt suffocating, where we just need some alone time, where we need to catch our breath? Is I don't know that it has to be terrible. Also, catch my breath is just one translation. A lot of the translations have show my smile. The
Yeah.
Hebrew is right, and when you read it like that, it has a totally different feeling, right?
Of course.
The Hebrew is it's a very hard to translate word. Va'avliga. It's it's a word that's that doesn't have any it's a very, very, very
Never heard that word.
very hard word to translate.
Vavlika.
Va'avliga.
What's its sense? What is the sense, Rabbi, of it?
Well, if it's from the root lamed, right? If it could be yeah, it's
Oh.
it could either have to do with joy, or it could have to do with breath.
With breath,
Yeah, with breath.
joyful breath.
Well, it's two separate possible interpretations of that word. I think if you read it as having to do with breath, you're reading it that way because of the context of the psalm, where breath is a big part of it, right? The emphasis on the word hevel, which means a shallow breath, might lead you to interpret this word as being about breath. It has generally been understood as having to do with gladness or joy, which is where you get the translation smile. But it's not at all clear what that word means. Right? That I may recover. That's the catch my breath kind of. That I may take comfort. That I might recover brightness. It's very challenging. Have some respite. Recover strength. Show my smile. It's hard to translate.
The sense you almost get is I like the revised English. I'm a passing guest, as all my forefathers were. Therefore, because I don't really understand what's going on here in your house, I'm doing my best to survive. It's frown on me no more. Let me look cheerful. It's stop your judgmental gaze and accusing me of what I know I'm sinning at. What can I do? Let me just enjoy what you've given me and enjoy the life that you've given me. It's almost that kind of a plea for mercy and for compassion with God rather than a don't look at me. It's you're acknowledging, yeah, I'm guilty. Guilty as charged. Give me a break. Let me at least love this and enjoy you.
Yeah, and you could get that from Hasha Mimeni. Hasha means give me a break. Don't look at me. Yeah.
I think it's that rather than look away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we'll close with psalm songs, and then as I mentioned in the email, we are not going to meet next Tuesday because I'm going to St. Louis to visit my grandmother, and so I won't be here to teach, but we will meet in 2 weeks, and we will do Psalm 40. All right, so here is Psalm 39 from Psalm Songs by Gaia Aronoff Bernstein. This is not a translation, it's a interpretation based on having read the psalm. 39. I wanted to be mute, accept your will, keep it in, not complain, not erupt, and say what I never should have said. Tell me, what's my life to you? My speck of dust of a life to you in your infinite, inconceivable space-time. Hear me. Care for me. I'm a guest of yours on earth, and I will silently accept the fate that's mine to bear, that's yours to give, if you only let me be me in peace before I have to go.
No, that's poetic.
Oh, man.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all.
For your trip.
Thank you.
Adorable.